and climate risks, a series of webinars to future-proof your business. This 4-part webinar series has been specially curated with businesses of all sizes, from SMEs to mid-tier companies to larger corporates in mind, because we recognize that while most businesses understand that sustainability is important and no longer just a nice to have, there still remains a need for greater understanding about what sustainability actually means, how ESG factors are linked to long-term business performance, and how businesses, especially in the SME and MME sectors, can participate and benefit. This is where collaborations such as these between non-profit organizations, private and public and financial institutions play an important role in helping businesses so they can start embarking on their net zero journeys. My name is Carol, and I'm the country head of corporate banking in leading the corporate franchise within HSBC Malaysia's commercial banking business. I will be your MC for today. We have an exciting agenda lined up for you. So without further ado, let's start with a short video showcasing HSBC's business plan for the planet. Over to you, Lynn, for the video. Thank you.
We all know what's going on. Millions of voices tell us every day. What we need more than ever is action. We need a game plan. We need ideas that deliver a future of sustained prosperity for us all. We need a business plan for the planet. Because business does. Because business solves problems. Business innovates because business acts globally. Business knows the meaning of now. Business has an eye on the future. At HSBC, we're committing between $750 billion and $1 trillion to drive sustainable transitions over the next 9 years and to support our clients all over the planet and their networks to thrive in a low-carbon economy. HSBC's target is for our own operations and supply chain to reach net zero by 2030 and to help all of our customers achieve the same goal by 2050. We believe that business can be part of the solution. If you do too, join us. Visit business.hsbc.com/BPFP.
Okay, thank you very much. And now I'd like to invite Stuart Milne, Chief Executive Officer of HSBC Malaysia, to say a few words. Stuart, the floor is yours.
Carol, thank you very much, and good morning, everyone. Datin Seri Sunita Rajakumar, founder, Climate Governance Malaysia. Puan Noor Azimah Abdul Aziz, CEO of the Suruhanjaya Syarikat Malaysia. Ladies and gentlemen, very warm welcome today to this event, which is being brought to you through a first-of-its-kind collaboration between Climate Governance Malaysia and HSBC. According to the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, global surface temperatures will continue to increase and will pass 2 degrees by 2030 unless deep reductions in emissions occur now. The challenge is huge and immediate. According to a recent HSBC survey, an astonishing 94% of global companies plan to move away from environmentally and socially challenged business models over the next 5 years. And now 51% of companies say that paying attention to ESG issues can help improve returns and reduce risk, rather than just being a compliance matter. In Malaysia, the vast majority of the customers we engage with are very aware that they need to have clear plans to transition to lower carbon business models. A critical mass now sees this as important for driving competitive advantage. But often they find it difficult to know how to approach the topic from a very practical perspective. Through HSBC's partnership with CGM and with the help of Bank Negara, Bursa Malaysia, the Suruhanjaya Syarikat Malaysia, Ernst Young, the Malaysia Semiconductor Association and PwC, we've developed a 4-part sustainability webinar series to equip businesses of all sizes, from SMEs to large corporates, with the understanding of what climate change entails, why bankers and regulators are taking this so seriously, steps that can be taken to manage the business risks arising from climate change, and how to integrate sustainable practices within your own organizations. Today's session will specifically focus on how climate change will affect your business. As the Malaysian chapter of the World Economic Forum's Climate Governance Initiative, Climate Governance Malaysia plays a fundamental role in addressing climate change by helping companies develop effective carbon net zero transition plans. And as a bank, we see our role as being there for our customers to help finance your transition to a carbon net zero world. To help make this happen, we've committed up to $1 trillion in financing and investment by 2030. And we have also committed to make our Islamic banking subsidiary in Malaysia, HSBC Amanah, our group's first sustainable bank by the end of next year. Through this collaboration with Climate Governance Malaysia, we aim to build a healthier, more resilient, and more sustainable future for all. I'd like to thank each of you for taking the time to be part of today's event, and I hope that you'll get practical advice from the webinar series that will enable you to develop your own approach to sustainable business. By working together, we can and will make real progress on a challenge that can no longer be ignored. So thank you again, and now I'm going to hand back to Carol to take us through the next part of the agenda. Back to you, Carol.
Thank you, Stuart. We're going to move to, we'd like to invite Puan Azimah, the Chief Executive Officer of the Companies Commission of Malaysia, to deliver the keynote address. I understand Puan Azimah is not able to be with us today, so there will be a recording that's going to be played on Puan Azimah's keynote address.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Yang berusaha Datin Seri Sunita Rajakumar, the founder and chairman of Climate Governance Malaysia, Mr. Stuart Milne, the Chief Executive Officer and Executive Director of HSBC Malaysia, esteemed speakers and panelists, ladies and gentlemen. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh and a very good morning. First and foremost, it is my great honor to express our appreciation to Datin Seri Sunita Rajakumar for inviting SSM to collaborate with Climate Governance Malaysia, CGM and HSBC in organizing this event and to deliver this keynote speech for session 1 with the theme How Climate Change Will Affect Your Business. As we embark on the National Recovery Plan and more economic sectors are being opened, this webinar series is significant and timely to the present situation where it is critical for businesses which have been badly affected by the COVID-19 pandemic to align their business strategies to remain sustainable. Ladies and gentlemen, while we understand the plight of many businesses which are struggling to remain afloat, but issues in sustainability and climate risk should not be neglected. Ladies and gentlemen, the theme of this webinar portrays the real-life hurdles faced by corporate sector to adopt a sustainable business strategy which aims to preserve a good environment, social and governance, or known as ESG, in their operations to create long-term value, thereby helping address some of the world's most pressing problems. Some of the global issues include climate change, depletion of natural resources, respecting human rights, issues in business, fair working conditions, pollution and environment issues, and many more. So many of today's companies have adopted the triple bottom line approach, which suggests that companies should focus on more than just profit or the bottom line, and at the same time measure the social and environmental hazards in decision making. So these focuses are also referred to as the 3 Ps, or people, planet and profit. So there are many research findings, ladies and gentlemen, which reveal that adoption of sustainability strategies into business operations will ultimately boost business performance. So ESG metrics are often used to determine how ethical and sustainable an organization is. So accordingly, companies with high ESG ratings consistently outperform the market and can lead to long-term benefits. Ladies and gentlemen, sustainability doesn't mean sacrificing a generation of profit, but instead it has become a crucial element to any organization successful strategy. A business that does not factor in sustainability risks is less successful in several measures, including profitability, growth, and employee retention. In this respect, Suruhanjaya Syarikat Malaysia (SSM) has initiated efforts to encourage companies to report on ESG matters as part of non-financial reporting as provided under the 5th schedule of Section 253 Sub 3 of the Companies Act 2016, which is administered by SSM. So this provision, ladies and gentlemen, is applicable to all types of companies and is to be applied on voluntary basis. Companies are encouraged to prepare and lodge the business review report to the registrar on non-financial matters to provide a broader perspective on the company's performance in addition to the usual mandatory disclosure relating to the company's financial performance. So to this end, SSM has also issued the best business practice circular number 6/2017 on business review report with the title Guidance to Disclosure and Reporting. This publication provides useful recommendation for companies to prepare the business review report and for submission to SSM. So, ladies and gentlemen, these initiatives are set out to provide companies the opportunity to realign their business strategies in compliance with ESG principle and embark on the sustainability reporting, including the impact of the company's operation for its employees, including matters relating to working conditions, corporate practices in human rights, as well as social and community issues such as the impact of businesses on local community, including human rights investments towards the local community, recruitment amongst the local community, and many other issues. As such, I would like to take this opportunity to encourage companies to prepare and submit your business review report to our registry, to SSM, which can then be used by policymakers, by the corporate community to determine the appropriate policies or incentives that could be introduced in sustainability practices. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope this webinar will be a source of reference to the corporate and business sectors to align their respective business models towards ESG compliant to remain competitive and sustainable in the industry. At the same time, I believe all participants should take advantage of the knowledge acquired and insights discussed in this webinar into your respective organization. Last but not least, I wish to congratulate all participants for being present at this webinar despite being held virtually. Once again, my sincere congratulations to the organizing committee, CGM and HSBC in making this part 1 of the 4 series of the virtual webinar a success. I wish all of you the best and have a fruitful discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Azimah, and that was enlightening. As you say, companies will be less successful without the ESG element in their business. And now it's time to start the panel session. Without further ado, I'll hand over to Liz Bradford, who will be moderating the session. Liz, over to you.
Many thanks, Carol, and good morning, everybody. My name is Liz, as Carol said. I'm the Head of Strategy and Chief of Staff for Commercial Banking here in Asia Pacific. And it's my pleasure to be here with you today to moderate, which I'm sure is going to be a highly informative panel discussion. We're joined today by a truly esteemed panel of speakers, and I've only been given a couple of minutes to introduce them, so I'm going to do my best because there is a lot of expertise on this panel. So Datin Seri Sunita Rajakumar probably needs no introduction, but she is the founder of Climate Governance Malaysia. She's a professional independent director and a strong advocate of the importance of governance in general and risk management. In founding Climate Governance Malaysia, which is the country chapter of the World Economic Forum's Climate Governance Initiative, she's also a fellow of the Institute of Corporate Directors in Malaysia and promotes gender diversity on boards with the 30% Club. She's also a member of the Global Advisory Board of Nottingham University's School of Business and the advisory panel of the UN Global Compact Malaysia Sustainability Centre of Excellence, and is a workstream lead for the government policy of the CEO Action Network, an industry-led initiative to increase sustainability and climate resilience. Finally, she's chair of Caring Pharmacy and an independent director of Bursa-listed Dutch Lady Milk Industries, MCIS Insurance and Zurich General Insurance, as well as a trustee of no less than 5 charitable foundations. So certainly someone who has some expertise. We're also joined by Kelvin Tan, who is the head of sustainable financing and investments for ASEAN at HSBC. Prior to establishing this role in September this year, Kelvin was CEO of HSBC in Thailand for 6 years, responsible for overseeing and growing HSBC's wholesale and private banking business. He's also held several other senior roles during his tenure in Thailand, including the chairman of the Association of International Banks, and was the founding member of the Thailand United Kingdom Business Leadership Council. He has a banking career spanning over 3 decades with a focus on corporates and multinational corporates across industries in Singapore and Asia Pacific. Finally, last but certainly not least, Arina Kok is an Ernst Young consultant partner focused on climate change and sustainability services, and the EY ASEAN Integrated Reporting Subject Matter Expert. Arina helps clients to integrate sustainability into long-term strategic and operational plans to create lasting value, enhance reputation, and build public trust. Under her leadership, EY has issued the inaugural Climate Risk Disclosure Barometer in 2020 Malaysia, which analysed Malaysia's top 100 public listed companies reporting disclosures against the Global Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, the TCFC's recommendations. In 2020 and 2021, bear with me, I'm nearly there, everybody, Arina supported the Bank Negara Malaysia and the Securities Commission Malaysia Joint Committee for Climate Change to facilitate capability building workshops under the UK Prosperity Fund's ASEAN Low Carbon Energy Programme. She's also been involved in discussions with the Ministry of Environment and Water, Bursa Malaysia, and the Securities Commission Malaysia on green and social policies and standards for Malaysia. Datin, Sunita, Kelvin and Arina, thank you so much for taking time out of your clearly very busy schedules to join us here today. Before we begin, and it's been fantastic to see so much action on the chat function, just a reminder to everybody to please do submit questions on the Q&A function, and we will get to those after a few minutes. But first, we will turn over to our experts on the panel. And Datin, Sunita, perhaps I could start with you. Could you please help us set the scene and explain what's happening to our environment today?
Thank you so much, Liz, and thanks so much to HSBC and SSM for helping us organize this series of webinars. So what's happening to our environment today? Why is sustainability suddenly becoming a buzzword? Well, I would like to think that a lot of this goes back to the concept of Earth Overshoot Day. Everything that we do is extractive of the environment. And globally, we are extracting more from the environment that can be replenished by the end of July. And for Malaysia, Earth Overshoot Day falls at the end of May. So the science has clearly established both the effects of the climate crisis and clarified the expected outcomes of global warming. The causality is clearly established as arising from human activities. So this is going to lead to changes in water cycles, rainfall patterns, sea level rise, the ocean, extreme weather events as we are already seeing around us. And all this is amplified by the rapid increase in urbanization and the destruction of the natural environment. Malaysia and Southeast Asia are disproportionately adversely affected by rising temperatures. The United Nations commissioned IPCC recent assessment report 6, also called Code Red for Humanity, is then leading people to think, how is capital being allocated? How do assurance providers discharge their duties? Because these natural conditions are necessary for our own survival. And so if we are destroying this, then this is arguably the greatest existential crisis that human civilization faces. We are being engulfed in an ecological crisis of our own making. And worse, when you're not pricing in the cost of pollutants or environmental destruction, and this critically impairs our ability to be resilient, there is a very high likelihood that we are misstating the earnings of corporations all around the world. And so by designing a business strategy that uses the Earth's limits as a framework, companies can make sure that they're doing their fair share and they're contributing towards the solution. So in essence, this is how I would describe the crisis that we're facing right now.
Thank you. That really does put it into perspective for all of us, I'm sure. Before I turn to Arina, there are a few terms that we keep hearing, specifically around things like net zero, transition, and brown and green fields. Would it be possible to explain a little bit about what these mean for everybody on the call?
Sure. So climate risks can broadly be described as physical risks and transition risks. So physical risks include any damage to property, loss of lives arising directly from extreme weather events, change in rainfall patterns, for example, that we're going to have shorter, more intense bursts of storms, rising sea levels, extreme heat days, which are going to give rise to heat strokes for workers who are working out of doors. And transition risk, very simply, includes carbon being priced. Asad Razuk, who is an activist based in Singapore, is fond of giving Toyota as an example. Toyota's global profits of $20 billion would be entirely wiped out at a price of carbon of only $50 per metric ton. And there's also one of the transition risks also is the inevitable policy reaction, that governments can come late to the table, but they can pivot quickly, and they have a whole array of policies that they can implement very quickly. So businesses need to be ready for these transition risks. Next, net zero. There is a recognition that economic growth is closely related to carbon emissions. And so we need to redesign business processes, supply chains to decarbonize and to decouple from the use of fossil fuels. So you can reduce this significantly through best practices, production efficiencies, and some reliance on technologies, but there are hard to abate, deeply entrenched emissions for which there are no technologies available at scale. And for this, you need to offset. And after offsetting, then you have net zero carbon footprint. And then finally, transition to a Paris-aligned world that all countries are committed to limiting warming. So the usual interpretation of the Paris Agreement is that we can limit warming to 2 degrees and keep pathways to 1.5 degrees of warming open if you reach net zero by 2050, or if you halve your emissions by 2030, which is only 8 years away. But the IPCC 6th assessment report that was issued in August, which is described by the UN Secretary General as Code Red for Humanity, now says that the expected range of warming, 1.5 degrees, is no longer an option. The range is now between 2 and 4.5 degrees of warming. So this is because the cumulative stated contributions from every country are insufficient to limit warming. And so this is why the need to transition to a Paris-aligned world is becoming so critical. And many businesses, industry sectors, countries are not going to be able to make this transition. Thank you, Liz.
Thank you so much, Datin Sunita. That really sets the global context and explains some of the critical terminology for us. So thank you for that. Arina, perhaps if I could turn to you, I know you've had an exceptionally busy past few days. Would you mind sort of illuminating for us a little bit about the local landscape in Malaysia and what's happening on the ground in terms of climate governance?
Sure. I think all of us have already been quite aware with the launch by Securities Commission on the Enhanced Malaysia Code of Corporate Governance 2021 back in April. And what are the key areas that the MCCG 2021 has now provided is 5 step up for businesses to enhance their sustainability governance. So the board and the senior management are now have to actually look at sustainability and communicate their strategies, performance, and targets, not just internally, but to external stakeholders as well. So what we see the landscape in Malaysia that's going to shift fairly rapidly just in the span of this year is most board members can no longer shy away from understanding or approving the strategies and targets in relation to sustainability. That's one. Second part is there's a clear role for senior management to actually now drive the performance review of sustainability, including climate risk within the organization. And there is also a step up to say that they have to designate a dedicated person to oversee sustainability within organization. So from a governance perspective, we all know that given that this is a corporate governance step up enhancement, all organizations, most have already started to look at how their board of directors and senior management are working towards driving this, but a lot are still grappling on what are the strategies and the targets that they should be approving. So that is the challenge of the landscape we're seeing right now. To actually bring that down to a more palatable context is different sectors and different markets players will actually tackle it in a very different granular scale and detail. So what we have seen is, depending on the size of the organizations, there's usually 3 aspects on how business leaders will look at things. Number 1, what are the drivers by regulators? What are the compliance requirements that they need to focus on? And that's fundamental, right? Second is investors. Investors are ramping in terms of what they are looking. So with the Bank Negara's launch of the climate-related principle-based taxonomy, we all understand that all the financial institutions, banks, and insurers are enhancing the way they evaluate ESG performance of investments. So they're going to put that into the way they're doing their lending processes or their insurance underwriting as well. Now that's going to come in a very, very short span. Over the few days where I'm on another panel with Bursa, I think they've also shared that Bank Negara will mandate TCFD, Task Force on Climate Financial Related Disclosures. So that is going to just drive ramp up of climate related risk disclosures, not just for financial sectors, but the financial sectors will go to the broader system to ask for these risk disclosures as well. The third one is supply chain. For any organizations that are going to be further advancing or developing their market beyond just Malaysia, they are already facing the push from the supply chain management perspective. Customers are already asking for ESG assessment, as well as we see the recent news on the European Union cross-border adjustment mechanisms. There will be tax on imported goods by 2023 on heavy sectors that will cover the likes of cement, steel, energy, and so on and so forth. So even if Malaysia doesn't implement carbon tax anytime soon, if Malaysia businesses are involved in exporting these products, you will be taxed if you're producing it inefficiently. By the time 2023, the tax will come in, and we envisage more regulators or other country will set up the same equivalent regimes to put a tax or equivalent of tax on emissions or pollutants, as what Datin Sunita has mentioned. So I think the key challenge is to understand the landscape, and what business leaders are trying to define now are the scenarios on when all these would materialize, who's going to take responsibility within their organization, and how are they going to tackle and pivot their business to be in a better position to drive growth as well. So Liz, hopefully that gives a view of where we're seeing.
It absolutely does. Thank you, Arina. In your experience, what differences have you seen in terms of the size of businesses that now are having to take this into account? Because you've covered disclosures, supply chain, tax, everything else. So is there a difference between small and medium-sized enterprises all the way up to large MNCs? And what would you advise if someone's defining a climate adaptability strategy at one of these firms?
Yeah, so all businesses, when they face the COVID pandemic, all businesses are not, they face climate risk as well as the pandemic with the same scale. But the large businesses have a more deeper pockets, higher resilience, and an infrastructure to respond and react faster as compared to the medium and the smaller scale businesses. Now, what we are seeing is, even in the agenda to drive climate risk management, the larger organizations has better network, better access to information. They are on a number of committees or engagement with government. So naturally, they would have a higher level of info and insights. And given the discussions with the recent large organizations, the way they are tackling down the supply chain, they are also going to focus the climate risk management engagements with the larger suppliers as compared to the smaller ones. So with that, you will see a further distinguishment of capability and competency in the market, whereby if you are the large suppliers, you will be engaged earlier on the areas that your customers are really going to ask you. For example, you talk about property and construction, the large suppliers of the cement, steel, and glass are going to be engaged on emissions management before the rest of the down of the suppliers or the smaller scale suppliers will be in that discussion. So this will already drive a very disparate gap in terms of the readiness of businesses to pivot. So in that sense, what we need to understand is the market competitiveness will continue to grow. The large ones will continue to strengthen. The smaller ones will continue to left behind unless they understand where they are in the game and they come back on board as a coordinated system. So, and that's what we want to do because we do not want to leave anyone behind. So the importance of this kind of forum and the engagement is to make sure that everyone understand that they are not, what are the risks of them being left behind, while what are others actually doing?
Fantastic, thank you. I think that's a very clear call to action. I've seen, just before I come to you, Kelvin, I've seen a question coming up into the chat function. So just a quick reminder to everyone else, put them into the Q&A because there's a lot of greetings happening in the chat and I really wouldn't want to miss anyone's important questions. So I've got the one that's already there, but if we could put questions in the Q&A. Kelvin, before we get to the Q&A, having heard that, and it's probably the main reason that many of our attendees are here today, how does climate risk affect businesses specifically? And why do they need to start taking action now? How can financial institutions help in that instance from your perspective?
Yeah, so good morning, Liz, and it's an honor to be here in a part of the first webinar with CMG. First of all, I think my distinguished panelists have already actually articulated quite a bit of this, but I think climate change can affect, and certainly it's impacting the whole entire economy, and it's actually business agnostic. So you consider how interconnected our economies are and the supply chain today, it's actually critical for businesses of all sizes and all sectors to start considering the risks and the opportunities that climate change presents to the businesses. So just let's take example, the elephant in the room, which is the COVID-19 pandemic. It's actually a perfect example, that, we live in a sustainable crisis, right? So our economies are not ready for this shock, and it just highlights how connected our economies are when it comes to supply chain and logistics disruptions. So a climate crisis actually has the potential to be much more drastic because the consequences and the longevity is a lot, bigger than what, the pandemic will have. But the pandemic actually serves as a test case of what's coming up. And I think we all should be prepared for the climate change risk. As Datin had said, the two main channels of climate risk that people are facing is actually the physical risk and the transition risk. Now, for physical risk, I think we can see it and we can experience it in a more obvious manner, right? Whether it's rising sea level, floods, droughts, and all that. And that obviously impacts all businesses. But it's the transition risk actually that's less obvious, but certainly has significant economic risk to businesses. So when we think of transition risk, we immediately think of the high carbon emission industries like utilities, transportation, infrastructure. But to your specific question, Liz, in terms of how it impacts all businesses, as Arina has alluded to, actually it does impact, in a significant manner to the SMEs, the small and medium-sized enterprises, right? So many a times these SMEs are part of the whole eco chain for suppliers, to ultimate large corporations. And we're already seeing large corporations, be it the Walmarts of the world, the Pumas of the world, and the big buyers, Procter & Gamble and Unilever and all that. They're now, as they transition, and make their their commitments for net zero, targets, they are now also insisting that the suppliers are doing that. So if you're an SMEs and you don't abide to this low carbon emission standards, inevitably, I think, you might have the risk of being phased out in the global supply chain, for non-compliance, I think, and that's very important. But we just don't want to talk about the risk available, right? There's also obviously the opportunities that they're facing all, with this transitions, right? So as Datin says, under the Paris Agreement goal of net zero by 2050, there's an unprecedented amount of financing and investments that need to be placed and required. So according to OECD and the International Energy Agency, US $100 trillion of new infrastructure investments is required by 2030, just to have a 66% chance of achieving the 2 degrees goal. And more than 50% of that is required for infrastructure investments out in Asia and emerging markets. A study also has been conducted by DBS Bank and the United Nations Environment Inquiry and found that the demand for additional green investments in ASEAN from 2016 to 2030 is estimated to be US $3 trillion. And this spreads across renewables, energy efficiency, storage, infrastructure, food, agriculture, and land usage. So new technologies will emerge, new industries will emerge, and inevitably, I think there's going to be a lot of opportunities, when we talk about ESG, and there'll be new winners and emerging too. So it's important actually, throughout the industry, whether you're in SMEs, medium-sized or large corporates, to spot these opportunities and to actually move along with this transition. I would like to also mention that, from a government and a regulatory perspective, there's a lot of incentives and supports that, people can tap on. So it's important to be fully aware of this. Just to give you an example, in Singapore, they have the Singapore Green Plan where they're offering, grants and things like that for SMEs to transition. And in Malaysia, I think that, correct me if I'm wrong, Datin, there's a lot of arrays of schemes that Malaysia has also launched, right? Whether it's the Sustainable Development Financing Schemes, the Malaysia Sustainable Finance Initiatives, and the Green Technology Tax Incentives. Finally, I think it's important to note that when HSBC research finds that the climate solution providers and high ESG related stocks have really outperformed the global average. Just between mid-December 2019 and September 2020, the stocks of large corporates with stronger environmental, social, and governance ratings have outperformed the global average by about 4.7%. And if you talk about climate-related stocks, the gap is even bigger with performance that is 13% better. So, in summary, I think, businesses should start looking at the climate change and how low carbon transitions will impact them. Because, this it's inevitable and they will have to look at it, in terms of capturing new opportunities. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Kelvin. So very much a case of it being better to be proactive and respond to the opportunity rather than see this as a threat.
Absolutely.
I'm very pleased that you referred to the support available, because I've seen that we've got a couple of questions that have come through to that, and we'll get to that. But just before we do, perhaps Datin Sunita, I could ask you to just close on any messaging you might have to any leaders or business owners who don't currently see the need to change.
Thank you, Liz. Actually, we get this a lot of times because many businessmen, they push back, and they think, look, this is some Western propaganda, some hidden agenda. And the question that I want to ask them, because it's science that has brought these facts to our attention. Do you want to be on the right side of climate history? Is it your business strategy that you will succeed if society fails to make the transition? Is this the approach? Because if you agree that this is an existential crisis, which is what the overwhelming majority of scientists, 98% of them, are telling us that this is, if you agree that this part of the world is disproportionately affected, if you agree that this part of the world, especially Malaysia, is lagging in adaptation efforts, our mitigation isn't going fast enough, our adaptation needs far more support than it's getting. If you agree that we're lacking in access to real-time granular data, which can lead to better informed decisions and better allocation of capital, if you agree that our products and goods might no longer be welcome with our largest trading partners who have declared climate ambition and don't want to be accused of outsourcing their carbon footprint to countries that have virtually no controls, then carrying on in the existing trajectory is a race to the bottom. Is this a race that we want to be part of? Because as Kelvin mentioned just now, it cannot be argued that these climate risks are not hugely material. It is affecting how accounts are being drawn up. climate change and decarbonization is affecting all of us. We will not be able to self-isolate from this. The energy transition, which the world has committed to implementing, is rewiring our economic DNA. It is hard to see how any sector is going to be untouched. And so being clear today means capital is deployed to where it needs to go. And the lack of disclosure might actually artificially boost those sectors which are actually challenged by decarbonization. So I think we need to be very clear. We are making the journey of a multi-decade transition that's deeply complicated. We are entering the decisive decade of humanity. The key insight that we know today scientifically, whether or not we succeed in delivering the Paris Climate Agreement, is no longer just about decarbonizing the world's energy systems. We need to maintain our biodiversity, we need to transform the world's food systems, and we need to maintain carbon sinks in the natural ecosystem. So this transition must be the most significant transformation in economic history. And this is why the net zero asset class, which Kelvin also referred to, he shared some statistics with us, is going to be the most significant asset class over the next couple of years. And so to business leaders, they are going to be asked to lead. Are they going to be ready to step up?
Thank you so much, Datin Sunita. I think that's a very clear call to action for the business leaders on the call. And I've seen that we've got a lot of questions coming in, both in terms of what can companies do themselves, but also then what's the role of the government and agencies. And Alina, just a heads up, we've got a couple of quite technical ones, I think, that are directed to you as well. So if you want to take a look at the Q&A function, I won't put you on the spot now. But maybe we'll start with, we've heard very clearly what the businesses need to do. How can the government encourage, especially small to medium-sized enterprises, to embark on this path? So actually, we've had a question on this in the Q&A and also the chat around the responsibility should go on that, because it can't be purely pushed down in terms of costs. So what support is available and what role should the government play? And perhaps, Kelvin, I know you talked about that a little bit, so perhaps between yourself and either Datin, Sunita or Arina.
Yeah, I think, in terms of the role that the government can play, it's, I'll leave it to Datin to speak, to talk specifically about Malaysia, right? But I think, this is a responsibility that, it's not just the government, but, it's, as she has said, at the start, it's a responsibility that all of us needs to play with, right? From the financial institution point of view, I think though it's important that, financial institutions work with our customers to transition. It is not something that, we want to do just overnight. It is a long journey and a pathway that we need to work with, right? And, here in HSBC, actually, we are actually involved in quite a few task forces, right? Whether it's in Singapore, Malaysia, or both throughout ASEAN, to look and work with institutions like CGM, regulators, financial consultants, and actually fund owners and asset owners too, because it's important that how we drive people's mindset and change, it's important. So we talk about the financing side of it, and in terms of supporting that, but there's also the demand side of things. So as when fund owners and managers actually look at it, and the criteria changes, in terms of investing and all that, that will change the mindset also. And we see more and more of that, a lot of sovereign funds, pension funds, and all that, looking at these things, and actually, demanding now that ESG is something that's front and center, and that people need to abide to that, and that's important, right? Datin, do you want to just comment specifically or any of the schemes and all that Malaysia is offering to assist SMEs and companies in terms of the transition?
Thank you, Kelvin. I don't really want to comment on specific schemes because it's all industry specific. I know we've submitted a lot of recommendations into the government for next year's budget as well, which will be able to assist SMEs. But I just want us to take a step back because we get this sort of question a lot as well. And actually, we ran a series of roundtable discussions starting from April with the CEO Action Network. And it was conversations about what is needed. What are the policies that we need government to step up with to be able to facilitate a smooth transition? Because there's no silver bullet, there's no roadmap. Everyone is trying to feel their way at the same time. And so government, during Yobian's time, the MESTEC website had a listing of over 70 incentives, grants, ways in which government could support. Right now, it's in different ministries and under different agencies. But before all of that, I just want to invite businesses to just understand the criticality of the issue first. CGM, for example, has organized for over 90 webinars, all of which are free of charge, almost all of which are pre-recorded, and there's blog posts issued on this, even the series of roundtables that we organize. There's a whole wealth of information that's already available. And of course, organizations like EY are coming up with papers all the time. And there's also international information about best practices, how you set targets, how you measure, how you offset, for example, what other competitors within your same space are doing. I think before we talk about what government can do for you, I think you need to understand where your business competitive landscape is first. I think that's critically important because government is picking up at the same time. You know, we're having ongoing conversations with key ministries all the time. It's an evolving field. Everyone is trying to learn at the same time. But I do want to caution that there is a small cohort of business leaders who have not only taken action, they are well advanced. And they're looking at this as a competitive advantage. Sure, it's something that they can report back to their board, to their shareholders, to allocators of capital like bankers and insurers and long-term investors. But they also know that this is going to create a big gap, which Arina spoke about, between the people who are more competitive and the people who are still saying, is anybody coming to help me? That is the reality. And I see this very clearly. The cohort at the CEO Action Network is more than 50 members now. They're moving ahead. They're sharing best practices. They're very aggressive, very ambitious. And in the meantime, I see another cohort, which is like, I wonder when I'm going to get an email from the government saying that I need to do, or the regulator, or, you know, there's still a lot of people who are not competitive, who are taking a wait and see attitude, right? Arina, what are your thoughts?
Well, my thoughts is this. There's two value propositions to actually get to the sweet spot. One value proposition is if you are looking for funding, sustainable finance is going to be the key, largest lifesaver for most businesses that needs funding. But to tap on a massive pool of sustainable finance, which all banks are going to drive, right? And these are large pool of capitals and funds. What is the fit for purpose business model that the business would demonstrate? Why are you demonstrating that your business deserves to be funded? And if you're actually looking for favorable funding rates and mechanisms, what is your value proposition? So if you can answer that, you tick one of your own self-sustainable question. That's one, right? So that will help businesses to understand that there is a huge wave of sustainable finance is going to ramp up. What is your position and your business paper? Second thing is in terms of your customers, understanding your business survives based on your customers' needs, right? What is the value that you're going to create to them, right? And what is the implication of their needs and demands right now? We are already seeing a clear shift on consumers who have actually went on to digitalization. Now, if your products or solutions doesn't take a holistic view of what are the value you're creating, not just from profit, but for people and planet, you are going to be sort of moved out or removed from the consumer's list of preference. Of course, you can be cheapest, but it's a matter of time. The price competition will come in and you have no other bullets or guns within your armor to demonstrate the brand loyalty. So if we just cut from the angle, regardless of what support you're waiting, right, from the purpose of funding and from the purpose of consumers, there is already a need for you to define your business model, even down to the point where you're doing your marketing and development. You already have to demonstrate a certain level of transparency and traceability that you are walking the talk. Now, what will happen if you do not do that? You will be losing talent as well. We are all in the race of talent, right? And you want to keep your employees. So the third last aspect is the three value proposition is to retain and attract talent. Without a clear value proposition, you will not get the best of the talent, that you can't even keep the talent. So what we are saying is companies who understands the framework and understanding where they need to position, they are already mobilizing not just the business value proposition, they also understand what are the key projects or initiatives that they're going to mobilize, be it's artificial intelligence, looking at predictive or intelligent systems that will help them to anticipate what's to come, because that's what customers would ask for. Some are already mobilizing technologies like big data. If you're not talking about large techs, we look at the smaller social entrepreneurs. They're already looking at a different business model like urban farming, vertical farmings, and these are things where you don't need large business models. It is a matter of time the urban farming and vertical farming is going to be a mainstay. So there is already a ramp up of social entrepreneurs with clear business model that not just can tap on capital, brings a better value proposition to the consumers, and could retain and get the talent. So this is the landscape that we are seeing in the market.
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. The way I've heard it described is without a sustainable business model, no one will invest in you, no one will lend you money, no one will buy your products, and no one will want to work for you. Yep. To summarize that.
Exactly.
If I may supplement Arina's point on sustainable financing, I just give you some data which is actually quite mind-boggling. So, just this year alone, in the first 5 months of the year, 20 billion of green bonds has been issued in Asia, right, excluding Japan. And that already exceeds last year's issuance, and we think that, by end of this year, it will clearly, exceed 30 billion in terms of green bonds, and, and another 15 billion of social and sustainable bonds in the region also that will be issued, right? So there's a lot of demand for these, and a lot of investors actually, are pressured in actually, in their portfolio to look at ESGs and all that. And when we started this whole process in the debt capital markets and all that, you don't see the price differentiation of between green and non-green, but now we're actually starting to see that too. People are actually, because of the demand, pricing is actually better. For the SMEs, actually, there's also a lot of things that we can do for financial institutions and all that in terms of trade supply financing. So we have a scheme with Walmart, for example, where if their customers falls into Walmart's green suppliers, we actually will give them preferred pricing on this. So it's a win-win situation for both, the buyers and the suppliers. And as Datin says and Arina says, this is something that's going to come, and it's better that we are prepared for it than rather sit back, and find that you're not within, this whole scheme and you lose out. Yeah.
That's absolutely fantastic. Thank you all so much for so eloquently answering, I think, about 90% of the questions that were in the Q&A function. And I'm sure for those that have not yet been answered, we will be providing resources with the follow-up to this session. So thank you very much. I will just close briefly on the panel with huge thanks to all of you. And just the key takeaways, certainly, that I've taken from the discussion: climate change is happening now, and we have to do something about it. So action must be taken now with Earth overshooting. So we need to factor in both physical and the transition risks into planning. The importance of the role of business. So as Datin Sunita said, this should not be about waiting for that email from the government on what we should do next. This is really about taking accountability in combating climate change, and the criticality of a global view and a supply chain view, as well, as Alina touched on. And then finally, Malaysian businesses are at varying stages of transitioning, and there is support there to help around net zero, but accountability is going to be the strategic differentiator when it comes to both investment and this war for talent as well. So really now is the time to change. Thank you all so much for these insights. Carol, I think we could have carried on for another hour, but perhaps I can hand back to you at this point.
Thank you, Liz.
Thank you. Thank you, Liz. For the next round, perhaps we need a bit more time on the panel sessions with all the interest that we're getting from everyone as well. There's some really, really insightful questions from the audience, which at its height reached circa 200. So thank you to our amazing panelists for joining us and for the highly informative session. I'd like to invite Andrew Sill, our country head of commercial banking, to share his thoughts. So over to you, Andy.
Hi, I don't seem to be able to switch my camera on, so I'm not sure who's in control of that, but I hope you can all hear me well. Listen, we've reached the end of our first webinar in this 4-part series, and for it's been an absolute privilege to host such an esteemed panel of speakers on such a critical topic. Thank you all for your time, engagement, and candor. I have to say, wow, such a truly impassioned debate. And if anyone wasn't engaged in the criticality of sustainability and climate risk prior to joining this call, I'm pretty sure they certainly are now. It's absolutely fantastic. As our panelists shared, we need to make change happen now before it's too late. And all businesses have a critical role to play. Whilst often appearing an insurmountable task, now that we've talked about the whys of climate risk, the next few webinars will address the whats and the hows, including what the financial implications of climate risk are, what regulators and bankers are saying, how to start on a net zero journey, and how to accelerate your transition by learning from others who are perhaps further down the road. As Datin Sunita said, in the first instance, businesses need to understand the criticality of the situation and their specific industry landscape, as much as look to the government and others for support and help. What are your respective value propositions, as Arina said, the value you create for your customers and the transparency around that? In that respect at HSBC, we want to be a trusted advisor in your ESG journey, to support you in finding efficiencies in your supply chains, and to play a role in helping you to adapt your business models to reap the benefits of becoming more sustainable, regardless of which stage of the transition journey you're presently at, from SMEs to MMEs, all the way to large corporates. As has been said before, HSBC was named Asia's best bank for sustainable finance by Euromoney for the 4th consecutive year. And in Malaysia, HSBC Amanah won the ESG Islamic Bank of the Year award for the 2nd consecutive year as part of the Asset AAA Islamic Finance Awards 2021. We intend to leverage on our global network and expertise, as well as our partnerships, to create an enabling environment for our clients. We have a dedicated ESG solutions unit to support you on your journey to lower carbon emissions, as well as sector experts and a portfolio of transition finance solutions to help even heavy emitting sectors to progressively decarbonize. We provide green and sustainability linked financing, which can be tailor-made to meet your specific business needs. We want to help you source sustainably and reduce the carbon footprint within your supply chain through sustainable supply chain financing. To learn more about how we can help you in your net zero journey, speak to your relationship managers or register your interest on our public website. Once again, on behalf of HSBC and CGM, we would like to extend our thanks and appreciation to all of you for your virtual presence here today. And we look forward to seeing you at the next webinar on the 19th of November. With that, I'll pass back to you, Carol.
Thank you, everyone. Just a very big thank you to Datin Sunita, the team from CGM, Kelvin, Arina, and also Liz Bradford for moderating so well today. And to everyone that joined us, thank you for all the questions that you've put out as well. We take note of your feedback to try and extend this to longer. We will try and see what we can do, especially on the Q&A bit, and refine the next session, as Andy mentioned, on the 19th of November. So thank you all. Thank you for joining us, and see you again soon.
Thank you, Carol. Thank you, Kelvin and Arina.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
Thank you all.